the deportation to Spain. On the 13th day of July, 1896, Rizal received a notification to appear before Governor General Blanco in connection with a letter of recommendation. In the home of Rizal's, the news was received with rejoicing, since the boat was leaving on the next day and he could not possibly settle his affairs within 24 hours. He inquired from the captain whether he could take the next boat. However, upon returning home and exchanging views with his family, he decided to leave the next day after all, even if he could not sell his property. Rizal did not explain his sudden decision, but it had something to do with the imminent insurrection and the possibility of his being implicated when he had no participation in it. This was confirmed in his letter to Blumentritt.
From the Petan to Manila. At midnight on the 31st of July 1896, Rizal was on the España boat on the way to Cuba. He was accompanied by his sisters Narcesa and Josefa and his niece Angelica Lopez, with his 3 nephews and 3 boys. His departure was a grand event. The whole town saw him off without any urging. The town bound was there. As the hour of sailing approached, more and more people filled the port. Rizal felt deeply touched. When Rizal boarded the banca which was to take him to Spain, the band struck Chopin's Marcha Funebre. Was this the mourning hymn of the Petan for the loss of Rizal? Yes, and at the same time, it seemed an omen for the tragic destiny of the hero, who was not on the way to Cuba, but on the way to his death. On the 6th of August, Rizal arrived in Manila. To his surprise and disgust, he learned that the mailboat Isla de Luzon had sailed a few hours earlier. As soon as the boat docked, a Guardia Civil relayed the orders from the Governor General that Rizal must not be allowed to disembark. Soon after, his mother and sisters Lucia, Trinidad, and Maria, and several nephews came to see him. The guard returned saying that he was to keep him company, and that at 7:30 a.m. they would take him to the commandant's office. At the stated hour, nobody arrived, but at 10 o'clock in the evening, the same guard came to inform him that the Governor-General had changed the itinerary and that he was to transfer to the cruiser Castelia and anchored at Cavite. Rizal's arrival at the Castelia was announced to the commandant, who received him in his office. After kindly offering him a chair, he informed him of the Governor-General's order that he was to be detained but not imprisoned, so as to avoid the displeasure of both friends and enemies. With his usual good nature, Rizal thanked the captain. He was given a good cabin which he occupied until September 2, when he was transferred to the Isla de Panay. On the 13th of August, Rizal received news that hurt his soul. Jo, as he called Josephine, had written him of her exchange of words with one of his sisters, arising from some remarks referring to their unmarried state. She made an exception of Narcisa and his parents. So deeply in love with Jose, she generously told him that if he met a girl in Spain, he should marry her. It was better for him to get married and not live together as they did. This way his sisters would not be ashamed of him. The replies of Rizal to Josephine are not included in the epistolario, but it was evident that he wrote to her. 2 days later, the revolution broke out. It began with the historic cry of Balintawak, a suburb of Manila. Father Mariano Hill, parish priest of Tondo, a barrio of Manila, had discovered the Katipunan. The outbreak of hostilities was precipitated by this discovery. The Filipino insurgents gained victories in the area of Cavite. Rizal must have heard the moving of the guns from the Castilla, which was moored opposite Caloocan, a town which, together with many others, came under the power of the insurgents. In August 30, it was a great battle in Santa Mesa and in Mandaluyong, which initiated the attack of Manila. The Governor-General had to move out to Malacañang Palace to Santa Potencia.
The departure for Spain. On the second day of September 1896, Rizal was transferred to the mailboat Isla de Panay. A friend presented him to the captain, who attended to him kindly and assigned him a private cabin, which, according to Rizal, could not have been better. These were the external happenings. On the day of the departure of Isla de Panay, the wealthy businessman Pedro Rojas, accompanied by his son, boarded the ship. The Rojases dined in the dining room with Rizal at the captain's table. He suspected nothing impossibly because he was being closely guarded. On the other hand, the fact that he was on board should have prevented his being responsible for the events connected with the uprising. The next day, the 8th, was a crucial day for our hero. The Isla de Panay arrived in Singapore. Had Rizal known of the secret communications and the coded telegrams, perhaps he would have remained in the British colony, but he had given his word, and he had 2 letters from the Governor-General of the Philippines, which, in his beliefs, were a strong endorsement. Several Filipinos, headed by Don Manuel Camus, came on board, attempting to convince him to stay, but they did not succeed in making him break his promise. They had even arranged to fill a petition for a writ of habeas corpus if Rizal acceded, but Rizal had decided to proceed with the trip. The destiny of Rizal had been decided from then on. He would no longer be able to extricate himself from the trap in which he had found himself. He had been chosen to be sacrificial lamb, a role he would play with dignity up to the last moment of his life. On the 12th of September, the Minister of the Colonies sent another communication to the government with the information that Rizal had left Isla de Panay boat for Barcelona with the instructions from the Governor-General. On the 28th, Rizal wrote a Blumentritt, his close friend, in the letter. He wrote a passenger had given him an almost unbelievable information which, if it were true, would be end of the prestige of the authorities in the Philippines. In it, he related the entire series of events regarding to the petition and the authorization to go to Cuba. Then, for the first and the last time in his life, he hurled a strong invective at other Blanco. He insisted he had nothing to do with the insurrections as Blanco himself, if I had stated with dramatic impact. He would conclude the letter. I have offered to serve a physician, risking my life in the dangers of war and leaving all my affairs and my business. I am innocent, and now in return, they send me prison. The Isla de Panay arrived in Barcelona in October 3, 1896. In accordance with the rules in force, nobody disembarked for 3 days, during which the both will be under observation. Rizal was watched by the three pairs guards and was forbidden to communicate with anybody. On the same date, 3 days after his issuance of the royal order deporting Rizal to Alhusimas, Cuita in Spanish Morocco, the Minister of War caused a telegram in the Governor General of the Philippines asking the responsibility of Rizal's in the insurrections and as to the treatment of the said deportee. The response of the Governor General was closed forever, all positively saving Rizal's life.
From Barcelona to Manila on board the Colon. Rizal was treated with consideration on board, except for a minor officer who was ignorant of the circumstances. 3 days earlier, on the 3rd of October 1896, the Minister of War had wired Despujol that in accordance with the instructions from the President of the Council and Minister of the Colonies, he should be allowed communication and correspondence and treated with such a consideration as allowed by security reasons. In the Philippines, meanwhile, the revolution was fast spreading. It is an established fact that the root cause was the abuse of power in all levels. But the Filipino people rose up principally against the friars to interfere in politics, particularly the raising of the amount of the canon which the tenants of the lands had to pay regardless of economics and weather contingencies and of the plagues which broke out. On the 8th of October 1896, an officer informed him that a newspaper in Madrid held him responsible for the insurrection. This disturbed him very much. On the 9th of October 1896, he noted down in his diario the speculations about his future. The notes expressed in summary his concept regarding his destiny, his attitude toward life, and the judgment of the posterity. He believed that this is a blessing from God. To answer all the accusation against him, for either they do him justice recognizing his innocence or condemn him to death. He thought that what was happening to him was for the best. It was God's will. Once again, Rizal buried his thoughts, pervaded by an acceptance of martyrdom as part of his historic destiny as savior of his country. His fatalism and his conformity to the will of God, his understanding of his fate, together with the concept of his predestination and the divine will, gave him strength and prevented him from falling into despair. On the 9th of October, he wrote a note in German in his diario, in which, after saying that God's will be done, he added, "I am happy and ready." Not many years before, he himself had chosen the pseudonym Laong Laan, which means predestined or prepared long ago. On the 24th of October 1896, Colon arrived in Singapore. They placed him behind bars 16 hours before arrival instead of the usual 4. In his stopover, an attempt was made to save Rizal. Regidor, a Filipino lawyer residing in London, made efforts to save his friend. Charles Burton, English lawyer and solicitor of Singapore, submitted a written declaration stating that Rizal bore two letters of introduction to the effect that he was not involved in the insurrection and that the Spanish Constitution prohibited imprisonment without order of the judge prosecutor. The English law authorized anybody to ask for the freedom of Rizal while he was in English territory. In exercise of the right of habeas corpus, as to be expected, the results were negative. On the 3rd of November, he arrived in Manila.
Chapter 11: The Trials, Resurrection, and Execution, Fort Santiago. Fort Santiago, closely guarded Rizal, was transferred to Fort Santiago, a fortress which he already knew, for it was there that they took him in 1892. Before taking him to the Pitan, an anteroom and an adjacent bedroom comprised his cell. He was held incommunicado. This time, his relations with the wardens assigned to him were rigorously controlled. He knew nothing of what was happening outside and could not plan his course of action. Blanco had named Colonel Francisco Olive Judge advocate in charge of the general proceedings against the insurrection. This man was always showing up in Rizal way. He had taken this declaration of numerous detainees in an attempt to find out the names of supposed organizers and accomplices. The possible relation between Rizal and the Katipunan. In addition to the declaration, there were documents, mainly letters from those involved in the rebellion previous to and after founding of the Katipunan. Another factor unfavorable to Rizal was the atmosphere prevailing in Manila, especially among the wealthy Spaniards, including the friars. It was not the risk of losing their material position acquired through many years and accumulated through generations that moved them.
Before I continue the report, I am Adrian Macasaol. My assigned topic is all about the indictment. So let's start. On the 29th of November 1896, Rizal appeared before Colonel Alive and read the documents pertinent to his case. The documentary proofs gathered by Olive consisted of letters found during the research made in the house of suspected organizer of the Katipunan. Most of the document did not constitute proof against Rizal at all, since he never talked of separatism nor of insurrection. There were some Masonic letters mentioning the matter of liberty of oppression, as well as some protests against deportation without trial. Also among the papers were the lyrics of Kundiman, allegedly written by Rizal, but were really from Pedro Paterno's pen. In addition were the testimonies of detainees from September to November 1896, Two of these were those of Aguido del Rosario and Francisco Quezon, who indicated that Rizal was the honorary president of the Katipunan, and that is his picture presided over his session hall. This does not actually signify Rizal's knowledge or approval of the Katipunan, for the reason that Rizal was already in the Pitan when the Katipunan began its operations. Since the condition set by Rizal for liberation was the education of the people, it was possible that he would die or old age before it could be realized. Olive asked Rizal if he knew the detainees who have given testimonies implicating him in a rebellion. He said that he did not know most of them. He admitted having met Salvador in Madrid, as well as Diotano Arellano, brother-in-law of Marcelo del Pilar, but added that Arellano's testimony was doubtful owing to the difference between him and del Pilar. Rizal declared that he did not know Bonifacio, the head of the Katipunan, although he attended a meeting at the Onjongko house. As to his picture, he said that it was possible to get copies of his picture without his consent. Olive asked Rizal if he knew that there was a plan to rescue him from the Pitan, to which Rizal replied that he heard rumors but never had been directly informed of the plan. When the interrogation was finished, Colonel Olive sent a transcript of proceedings to Governor Blanco together with letters and documents. Blanco submitted all the papers to Captain Rafael Dominguez, who had been designated special judge for the case of Rizal. In this case, Dominguez initiated action on the case, so it took only 2 days to draw the conclusion, which were expressed as follows. So, muna ni siya. The accused is the principal organizer, the moving spirit of the Philippine insurrection, founder of societies, of newspapers, and has written book designed to foment the ideas of rebellion and sedition among the people, and the principal leader of the anti-government movement in the country. What Rizal was responsible for was kindling awareness to the Filipino people of their rights, and urging them to work for obtaining the same rights as those enjoyed by the pensionaries. He was responsible for having inculcated a sense of dignity. In truth, it is a grave thing to awaken the political conscience of the people, even without recommending violent means, as in the case of Rizal. Governor Blanco decreed that the case be passed on Don Nicolas de la Piña, who was then the Auditor General. He was not aware that Dominicans had sent a cable to the General Prosecutor in Madrid about his indolence and urging immediate action in his case. Don Camilo Palabeja arrived in the Philippines on December 3, 1896. He was the person whom the friars had in mind to replace Blanco as soon as they had succeeded in his transfer. Rizal was given a long list of official forms which to select his counsel. Since he knew no other person in the list, he selected Don Luis Rabiel de Andrade, a lieutenant of artillery. In December 13, Camilo Garcia Palabeja assumed his post as Governor and Captain General of the Philippines. As compensation, Blanco was named Chief of His Majesty Casa Militar. He was replaced by Palabeja. In December 15, Rizal presented to the judge his manifesto. The auditor was opposed to its publication if it had been published it would have caused confusion among the insurgents, especially those who did not understand Rizal's ideology and, and were moved only by the general idea of independence, which for them could be won only through armed struggle against Spain. The manifesto is a reiteration of the political concept of La Lega, liberty through education, the reform to be obtained through the intelligentsia. On the 19th of December, Palabiha decreed the Rizal case be forwarded to Lieutenant Auditor Don Enrique de Alcocer, who in turn should forward it to the prosecutor, Captain Rafael Dominguez, who would then send it to the Council of War.
The Council of War. The data and information about the Council of War are incomplete only after of 100 years can documents. BMEDs available relative to the Council. These are kept in the General Military Archives in Segovia. The main sources are the journalists of the time, together with the retainers' biography of Rizal. From 20 of December, Rizal, altogether with his council, started to prepare his defense. The council, although not possessing any special knowledge of the law, was inspired of a good will and possessed a clear intelligence. In December 25, regardless of it being a fast day, Rizal was informed on the next day at 10 o'clock in the morning that the Council of War would convene. Upon receiving the communication, Rizal wrote the table asking for the conference prior to the appearing before the council. On the 26th, at the Cuartel de España, a soldier's dormitory was converted into the improvised sala or courtroom. Behind a long table sat the president, Lieutenant Colonel of the Cavalry Don Jose Tugores, accompanied by the 6 captains of the different arms. In the front of the table was Rizal at ease despite being a handcuff. Beside him was Lieutenant Taviel, and near him the fiscal. The hall was filled with the people, the majority of whom were official and officer in the service. The rest were mainly peninsularis, some natives, on the bridge meant for the public of Josephine, with an unedifying woman. Rizal was in a black suit, white shirt, vest, and tie, his hair carefully combed. He was completely relaxed, the picture of serenity. The trial proceeded with the reading of the accusation by the fiscal Don Enrique de Alcolcer. He pointed to Rizal, who owned Spain, all that he was. The fiscal said, as the principal figure of the insurrectional movement. Next, he referred to Noli Me Tangere, in which, according to him, Rizal insulted the Spaniards. He noted, the El Filibusterismo praises the memory of the 3 priests who died by the garrote during the Cavanity mutiny. The fiscal talked of the significance of Masonry in the Philippines, which was the true enough but to confuse the practices of the Masonry. with those of the Katipunan. In his description of La Liga, there were many inaccuracies in dates, names, and aims. A legal association and rebellion were the final accusation of the fiscal, who indicated that for the first crime the penalty was imprisonment, and for the rebellion the penalty was life imprisonment. But since the law stipulated that in order to commit one crime it was necessary to commit another, the maximum penalty shall be applied death. The first lieutenant of the artillery, Luis Teviel de Andrade, began the defense of Rizal by emphasizing the fact that it could not avoid being prejudiced by the prevalent opinion regarding the right course. Then he asked, has Rizal performed any act of public and solemn that is separatist in the concept? Did he on any occasion declare that the abonates the church domination as a factor contributing to this prejudices? He pointed out that the princes of the both Castilla foremost caused speculation that Rizal was a participant in the insurrection. Also, later it was made known that he had been authorized to go to Cuba as a military doctor. Teviel cited a law, an annex to the penal code, which included a rule number 52 regarding the application of the penalties when the delinquency is proven beyond doubt by the conclusive proofs. The defense affirmed that the accusation did not have a probative value since they were not in a conformity with the rule.
As to the Liga, he admitted that the defendant had written by laws, but that he did so at the instant of Basa, at any rate, as they themselves stated. Its aim was only to promote commerce, industry, and consumers' cooperatives. Since his arrival in Dapitan in 1892, the defendant had refrained from all political accusation and that there was no proof to the contrary. Teviel closed his discourse, requesting the court to reject the images engendered by wars, for they could only provoke ideas of inscience, and judges should not be vengeful but just. Teviel's position was difficult, considering the climate in and out of the sala. The chairman of the council asked Rizal if he had anything to say. Rizal read his own arguments as addition to defense. Referring to the rebellion, Rizal declared that from July 6, 1892, when he was deported to Dapitan, he had removed himself from politics. Proof of this was the trip of Valenzuela if he had been correspondence with him. Valenzuela would have taken an expensive trip to Dapitan for Rizal to have been informed of uprising. Another proof is that they could not produce any letter of Rizal proving that he had previous knowledge of the uprising. Rizal went on to say that if he had wanted to escape, he could have done so since he had several boats at his disposal. As to his being aligned head of the insurrection, he asked, what kind of head is he who is not consulted for his projects? And when he says no, they say yes. Regarding the Liga, he stated that became inactive shortly after it was founded and that its aim were not objectionable. The creation of another society, the Katipunan, from the two organizations differed in their ends. For if they had identical aims, there was no sense in founding more than one. The chairman ordered that the sala vacated at that the council proceed with the deliberations. The Council of War, presided over by Lieutenant Colonel Jose Togoris Arjona, having met this day on the 26th of December 1896, accused Dr. Rizal Mercado Alonso of the crimes of rebellion, sedition, and illegal association. By the virtue of its powers, the council dictated the following sentence: Dr. Jose Rizal should be condemned to death, and in case of pardon will bear life imprisonment and subjection to vigilance for life, and shall pay the state indemnity of 100,000 pesos, which shall be passed on to his heirs for satisfaction in accordance with the articles. Fulavija convened the Council of Authorities. Not a single member of the council, not even Archbishop Nusalida, asked for commutation for the sentence. Aside from the council of the authorities, not one of the religion's hierarchy, nor his former Jesuit tutors, nor the Dominicans recommended pardon. On the 20th, Captain General Camilo Garcia Polavia approved the sentence of the Council of War, fixed the date of the execution on the 30th of December at 7 o'clock in the morning. On the same day, a petition for pardon, but she was not admitted. On the 29th, Judge Dominguez went to Fort Santiago to notify Rizal officially of the sentence. Rizal read a report of the auditor and that approval of Malacañang but refused to sign in, alleging that he was innocent. From that time, Rizal went about the last act of his life.
The retraction. Whether or not Rizal retracted, he should still be held in the highest esteem by the Filipinos as their greatest patriot. The total accomplishment of a man in life cannot be measured merely by his conduct during the last hour of his life. Rather, it should be evaluated on the basis of all his actuations, her virtues and defects, his loyalty to the truth of himself, as demonstrated throughout the span of his entire life. A little later, at 7:30 p.m., the Jesuit fathers Miguel Sadira and Luis Visa entered his cell.
From that moment on, until 7 of the next morning, when he was shot, Rizal did not have a moment's rest. Instead, he was bombarded with the matters of Christian doctrine by several persons. The Archbishop had chosen the Jesuits and not the Dominicians to persuade him to retract. With his usual good nature, Rizal received the Jesuit pleasantly, asking them if there still were some of the old professors of his time. They replied that only Fathers Villa Clara and Balaguer remained. At 9 o'clock, the two priests withdrew, but they were replaced by Father Rosell. While Father Rosell was in the cell, Santiago Mateix, a correspondent of Heraldo de Madrid, entered. Archbishop Nozalida had given instruction to the Father Pio P., superior of the Jesuit mission. The once of the conversation was accomplished, they should Rizal sign a document of retraction before administering the sacraments. Two drafts of retraction were prepared. At 10 o'clock in the morning, two other Jesuits entered the cell. Fathers Villa Clara and Balaguer. Balaguer approached the subject of religion, asking Rizal his ideas on doctrinal matters. When Rizal remained unyielding after a very long debate, Balaguer resorted to warning him of internal cremation if he did not relinquish his ideas. But Rizal knew how to control himself. He told Father Balaguer, "I promise you that the remaining hours of my life shall employ asking God for the grace of faith." The discussion lasted more than 2 hours. Rizal did not lose his serenity. He always measured his every word, and thus his conduct was exemplary, and for the next reason, he did not retract. In one of his real free moments, after lunch, Rizal wrote to illuminate the following letter. "My dear brother, when you receive this letter, I shall be dead. Tomorrow at 7, I shall be shot, but I am innocent of the crime of rebellion. I shall die with a clear conscience. Goodbye, my best, my most beloved friends, Fort Santiago, December 29, 1896. But the Jesuit did not give up. Balaguer returned at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, maintaining it until night came. Balaguer left the fort after speaking of Father Visa at the Ateneo, proceeded to the palace to inform the Archbishop that there was some hope. Surprisingly, Balaguer did not make an official report of the retraction, although Mateix, the correspondent of the Heraldo de Madrid, cabled a few minutes after midnight, quoting the only Madrid cabled a few minutes after midnight, quoting the only source of information that Rizal will retract his errors and will confess before contracting marriage. Balaguer started that Rizal signed the retraction and the profession of faith. He asked for confession, and Father Villaclara heard it. He then slept for a few minutes. Upon waking up, he confessed the second time and expressed his wish to marry Josephine. According to Father Balaguer, although the documents is signed were sufficient, Father Villaclara still asked him to read some acts of faith, hope, and charity, which he read from a prayer book and which Rizal repeated after him. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he heard Mass and confessed for the fourth time. Then, he heard another Mass, this on basis Balaguer's account. At 5:30 am, Rizal took his breakfast. Soon after he wrote the following letter, 6 am, December 30, 1896. My beloved Father, please pardon me for all the pain with which I have repaid you for all your concern and efforts to give me my education. I did not want this, nor did I expect it. Goodbye, Father. Goodbye. Another letter, undated, was addressed to the sisters and to Pasiano. Shortly after 6 o'clock in the morning, Josephine arrived accompanied by a sister of Rizal. According to Balaguer, he advised the captain of the fort to proceed with the marriage ceremony. The two standing on each side of the Spanish officer. At first, the officer was opposed to the bride and groom holding hands during the ceremony, but he had to accede because the marriage ritual required it. Balaguer then proceeded with the religious rites. Before parting, Rizal whispered some words of advice to Josephine. Shortly after, her face bathed in tears, she withdrew. All the foregoing was related by Father Balaguer. 15 minutes before the execution, Father Marx arrived, which brings the number of priests who visited him to it within 24 hours. The version circulated by ecclesiastical authorities of that time. The part referring to the retraction of Rizal in his conversation at the last hour to Catholicism has not been considered satisfactorily admitted by the Catholic opinion in the Philippines. It's by Saida, 1994.
The execution. At 6:30 a.m., the squad of artillery soldiers was formed, preceded by a bugle and a drum. Rizal came out, bound from elbow to elbow, flanked by Fathers Villaclara and March followed by Tabiel, his counsel. The squad surrounded them all. They took the Pasillo de Maria Cristina, now named Pasillo de Bonifacio. The hero walked with a relaxed, modest stride as though taking a walk. He chatted with his companions about the scene around him. Pointing to the Ateneo, he said to Tabiel, "There I spent 7 years." His gaze slowly alighted on other things in the distance, like Corregidor and the hills of Cavite. On his way to what the Filipinos could consider their Golgotha, his steps became more firm, as though he was not conscious of the historic destiny he was marking with every step. Across the Luneta, they went to Bagong Bayan, that tragic site where Philippine liberties were sacrificed. He hastened his steps as they approached the square. Rizal placed himself in the middle of the square, filled with 400 men with a band playing. The firing squad was composed of 8 native soldiers, but as a measure of caution, another line of peninsular soldiers stood behind. Rizal refused to be shot from behind, that only traitors were the shot, and that he was not a traitor to Spain. The captain replied that he was sorry, but those were the orders and he has to follow them. At the last moment, Rizal requested that he be shot in the body, not in the head. That way, he must have thought he could at the last moment turn his head and body sidewise, so he would fall face upward, facing the blue sky, of which he had so often sung, and fall on the earth which he never wished to see stained with blood. At this point, Ruiz y Castillo, the military physician who attended him, took his pulse and was surprised to find it normal. The order to fire was given. The shot rang out, and the body of the patriot who had faced death so bravely, with such dignity and honor, fell with his face up toward the sky. He did not fall as a traitor. Nature had made the rectification, and Rizal, nationalist to the last minute of his life, had used his head to obtain his ends. Shouts of "Viva España! Death to traitors!" were heard from the Spaniards. The band of regiment struck the first chords of the Marcha de Cadiz. The Philippines had lost its greatest patriots, but Spain had lost the Philippines. The body of Rizal was placed in a van and with the greatest secrecy buried in the old and unused Paco cemetery. Eudora wanted to comply with the last wish of her son, that the family should take charge of his cadaver. After several objections on the part of some officials, Civil Governor Manuel Luengo acceded to the petition. But when the funeral coach left, they had already secretly taken the body away, and Narcisa went to all the cemeteries of Manila in search of the body in vain. On the way back, she saw through the open gate of the Paco cemetery some guards as civilis. This gave her a clue. She entered the cemetery and after much searching, found a grave with fresh torn earth. She gave the grave digger a tip and placed a plaque with the initials of her brother in reverse, RPG. That is Rizal Protasio Jose. This was initially done by the family so the authorities would not notice that the marble slab belonged to Rizal. When the Americans had taken over Manila on August 17, 1898, the family, led by Narcisa, had Rizal's body exhumed. Almost 2 years after his death, Rizal's body was buried without a coffin, and his clothes and shoes could still be identified by his family. Whatever was hidden in Rizal's shoes, as he mentioned to his sisters in the final hours before his execution, crumbled to the touch. 16 years after, Rizal's bones were retrieved by his sisters on December 29, 1912. The ivory urn with Rizal's remains was carried in a procession to the Ayuntamiento in Intramuros, a symbol of mighty Spanish rule. As thousands watched the event, Rizal's remains were placed in a foundation over which his monument was to rise almost 90 years later on the ground he had fallen a century ago.